Hi, everyone. Mimi Roca here for Talking Feds. Wanted to talk to you today about Ed Martin. You may have heard his name before. You probably have. He has been the interim U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. since basically, January 20th. And he's also been nominated by Trump to be the permanent U.S. attorney during Trump's time anyway, in Washington, D.C. Sometimes the interims are nominated to be permanent ones, sometimes they're not. And what you've probably heard in the past about Ed Martin is some things about his past. First of all, he was an active advocate for and participant in the Stop the Steal movement. He, denied the legitimacy of the 2020 election. He's pretty much a ideologue, let's put it that way, and has no prior experience as a prosecutor or even as a criminal attorney. So, his lack of experience, he has conflicts of interest with respect to cases that the DC U.S. Attorney's Office has handled, in particular, the January 6th prosecutions. But you may have also heard, in addition to his prior, his past, how he's been since he has been interim U.S. attorney. And there really aren't enough ways to describe how outrageous his conduct has been since he's been the interim U.S. attorney. He has been perhaps the single most outrageous example of kind of the justice system gone awry under Trump. And that's saying a lot because there are a lot of examples. But it starts with when he took over the office, he immediately began firing career prosecutors who were involved in the January 6th cases, as if, even if you disagree with the cases, it certainly doesn't follow that the prosecutors who handled those cases as a matter of assignment and their job did anything wrong. But he wanted to have scapegoats and he wanted to cause fear in other prosecutors who might think about investigating or charging someone whose interests were contrary to Trump or Martin. He uses social media in a way that is so contrary to how any prosecutor, let alone a U.S. attorney, should use it. There are actual rules, guidelines, policies in the DOJ manuals about public statements by U.S. attorneys and not prejudicing cases. I know that stuff all sounds quite quaint, and in many ways, Pam Bondi has violated it herself. But again, Martin has taken it to such an extreme. He threatens potential subjects and people regularly on social media. He said at one point that he was threatening to chase to the end of the earth. That's a quote. Not just people who had acted unlawfully, but people who had acted unethically, which is actually not a thing that prosecutors can do. It's beyond his authority. He threatened Covington and Burling and Jack Smith on social media. He sent a threatening letter to the Georgetown Law School about its DEI program, which, again, even if you disagree with it, there's really no sort of criminal legal authority for him to be looking at that, and nor did he cite any. He has said publicly that his role as U.S. attorney, his primary role is to act as one of President Trump's lawyers, protecting his leadership, which again is completely not his job or his role. And he just, in general, has really acted incredibly unbecoming of a federal prosecutor, let alone for a U.S. attorney as the head of one of the largest, most powerful U.S. attorneys' offices in the country. This led to people in his office who either had been fired or resigned, and former alums issuing quite a strong statement against his nomination. I don't know all those people personally, but I am quite confident that they're from all political backgrounds, because this really isn't about politics. This is about how incredibly unprofessional he is. And their quote, in fact, said that he has, quote, butchered the position, turning it into a political arm of the current administration in ways that typify authoritarian and indeed totalitarian regimes of the most notorious sort. Since that time, there's been even more kind of outrageous things. ProPublica reported just last week, I think, that Martin may have orchestrated an online kind of harassment campaign against a judge in a Missouri case in which he was a defendant and disguised his own involvement. That's conduct unbecoming of a lawyer, period, let alone a U.S. attorney. So all of this is kind of background. I mean, there's more. There's his embrace of a pretty well-known Nazi figure. And he claimed later, when there was blowback about it, to not have known that this person had sort of Nazi tendencies, fascist tendencies. And so it just goes on. So now where we are, though, is it was time for Martin's nomination basically to become ripe, to come up. And the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee were asking for a hearing. Now, that may not sound like such a big deal, but it actually would have been the first time in 40 years that there would be a hearing on a U.S. attorney nomination. Unlike other nominees, U.S. attorneys almost always get confirmed based on the support of the senator in their state and kind of written answers, hearings on paper, if you will, about their character. And in this case, the Democrats were saying he's so extreme, so dangerous, so reckless, we need to have a hearing. Because they knew that if Ed Martin had to come and testify publicly under oath and people would see his demeanor, his character, his answers, that would not be good for his nomination, and there would be a much better chance of him not passing. Well, it seems that what happened is even before we got to that point, there were written answers coming in as a result of his, nomination process starting. And the Republicans seem to have put a hold on Martin's nomination for now. We don't know what that means exactly. In other words, we don't know if that means there will be a hearing down the road, or they are going to withdraw his nomination, or what. But one of the key figures in this is Senator Thom Tillis from North Carolina, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee and who has expressed reservations about Ed Martin. So if Tillis votes against proceeding, or indicates, frankly, that he isn't going to proceed with Martin's nomination, then, it's pretty much a done deal. So Tillis is very, very key. And I think this is really important for a couple of reasons to talk about. One, it is kind of a test at this point. Is there any life left in the Senate's really, really important and until now, basically lifeless function of, being a check on executive power? I mean, as we've discussed many times, Trump has proven that, he will just go ahead, and it is the courts so far and the rule of law that have been limiting or slowing it down. Are the Senate Republicans going to join in that effort to at least put a check on the most extreme parts? And it seems like now there is some hope of that. So, in a time when we're looking for a little bit of hope, I was, pleasantly surprised to hear this development, and I'm hoping that it sticks, because there really is nothing more important in a chief prosecutor than their character, their restraint in so many different ways. And he is just so completely lacking in that. So if you are so inclined, it would be a good thing to call Thom Tillis's office, send letters, social media, whatever you want to do. But I think regardless of party, Ed Martin is just a really, really dangerous person. So I'm going to sign off now. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.